The Riverside Poltergeist. In the fall of 1967, a young woman walked into her office every morning in a quiet California town, and each time, all hell broke loose. Lamps swung as if moved by invisible hands. Telephones rang with no caller on the line. Pictures rotated on the walls. And the police, physicists, electrical engineers all stood baffled and could not explain what they saw with their own eyes. This is the tale of Riverside, one of the most intriguing poltergeist stories ever imagined. A story so unbelievable that it blurs the lines between reality and the impossible. Riverside, a peaceful city in Southern California, not far from Los Angeles. In the summer of 1967, no one would have thought that this peaceful city would soon stand at the center of a phenomenon that would attract scientists from across the country. Main Street, number 42, a completely normal office building. Here was located the law office of attorney Michael Anderson. Anderson ran a respectable practice. His clients valued his professionalism. His employees worked in a quiet, orderly environment. Or at least, that's how it was until the summer of 1967, until a new office worker started. Her name was Jennifer Parker, 19 years old, a trainee who had just begun her training as an office clerk. A young woman, like many others, a single mother of a small child. She had recently gone through a breakup, her engagement had fallen apart, the emotional burden was palpable, but no one could have guessed what was coming. No one would have thought that with her arrival, something else would also enter this office. Something invisible. Something that seemed to break the laws of physics. The first incidents were subtle, almost too subtle to be noticed. The telephone rang, but when someone picked up, there was no one on the line. That happens sometimes, the employees thought. Technical problems. Nothing unusual. But then it began to happen more frequently. All 4 telephones in the office rang simultaneously, with no incoming call, as if someone were playing a cruel joke. But the telephone company found nothing. No errors in the lines. No explanation. Then came the bills. The monthly telephone bill reached Michael Anderson in September. He opened the envelope and froze. The costs were astronomical. Hundreds of calls to the time service, the number 5550119. In some cases, up to 42 calls were registered within just 15 minutes. Anderson stared at the numbers. This was impossible. With the rotary dial phones of that era, it took at least 10 to 15 seconds to dial a number. Mathematically speaking, that many calls could not be made in such a short time. It was physically impossible. And yet the calls were there, in black and white, on the bill. He called the telephone company. They sent technicians. The technicians checked everything. The lines, the phones, the connections. They found nothing. Everything functioned perfectly. But the impossible calls did not stop. As the fall of 1967 approached, the phenomena took on a new, more disturbing dimension. It was no longer just about telephones. One morning in October, a light bulb exploded with a loud bang. The employees flinched. Then a second exploded, and a third. Within a few days, several lamps had mysteriously shattered. The fluorescent tubes on the ceiling began to rotate. Slowly, as if in slow motion, they unscrewed themselves 90 degrees in their sockets. Sometimes it happened while someone was watching. The tube simply turned, without anyone touching it. Electricians were called. They inspected the entire wiring of the office. They searched for short circuits, for power surges, for any technical explanation. They found nothing. The electrical system was in perfect condition, but the fuses still tripped. Again and again, for no apparent reason, the power supply suddenly interrupted, then came back. The lights flickered like in a horror movie. And then things began to move. Pictures on the walls, which had hung in the same place for years, began to rotate, slowly but clearly visible, sometimes only by a few degrees, sometimes by 180 degrees. Sometimes they rotated completely, 320 degrees, almost a full circle. The employees described the feeling they had when it happened. A strange tension in the air, like before a thunderstorm. A pressure on the ears. A coldness that spread, even though the heating was running. And then, suddenly, something would happen. A picture would rotate. A lamp would begin to swing. A telephone would ring. It was as if an invisible presence moved through the room, leaving traces of its presence wherever it went. Some employees reported a feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were directed at them, as if something were studying them, observing their reactions. It was a deeply uncomfortable feeling that caused some to leave early or call in sick. Desk drawers opened by themselves. Without anyone being nearby, the employees heard the characteristic sound of a drawer being pulled out, turned around, and saw the drawer slowly sliding open. The copy machine began to spill developer fluid, again and again. Even though the container was properly sealed, the fluid simply ran out, forming puddles on the floor, staining documents. A heavy filing cabinet, which weighed 180 pounds, moved across the floor, slowly but steadily. It left no scratches on the linoleum. It simply glided, as if pushed by an invisible force. The employees were frightened. Clients noticed the strange atmosphere. Some left the office more quickly than necessary. The stories spread throughout the city. The office of Attorney Anderson was haunted. Something evil had nested there. Michael Anderson was desperate. His business was suffering. His employees were frightened. The costs for repairs and telephone bills were rising. He needed answers. He needed help. In October of 1967, Anderson turned to Riverside Public Utilities. He reported the electrical anomalies, the exploding light bulbs, the tripping fuses. The utility company took the case seriously. They sent Paul Bennett, a senior employee, to investigate the situation. Bennett was an experienced electrician, a specialist who had spent decades solving electrical problems. He had seen everything, or so he thought. Bennett installed monitoring equipment, voltmeters, current meters. He wanted to measure, document, understand the electrical anomalies. The devices actually recorded deviations. Strong voltage spikes, sudden power surges strong enough to blow fuses. But here came the puzzling part. Although the measuring instruments showed power surges strong enough to destroy fuses, the fuses themselves were undamaged. It was as if the energy simply disappeared, as if it were being absorbed by something. Bennett noticed another strange pattern. The phenomena only occurred during office hours, never at night, never on weekends, only when the office was occupied, only when the employees were present. And something else struck him. The intensity of the phenomena seemed to vary. Sometimes they were stronger, sometimes weaker. But there was a pattern. The incidents were particularly intense when a certain person was present. Jennifer Parker, Bennett observed. When Jennifer walked through the office, the lamps began to swing. When she passed by a desk, the lights flickered. When she entered a room, the pictures on the walls rotated. It was not an immediate connection, but the pattern was too clear to be ignored. The 19-year-old office clerk stood at the center of the phenomenon. Bennett documented everything meticulously. He wrote reports. He noted times, locations, witnesses, but he had no explanation. No scientific theory could explain what he saw. Riverside Public Utilities was baffled. They had performed all technical tests, excluded all conventional explanations. It was time to bring in experts with different expertise. The news of the mysterious incidents in Riverside spread in academic circles. In November of 1967, it reached two physicists from the Stanford Research Institute, Frederick Carter and George Fisher. Carter and Fisher were not parapsychologists. They were scientists, trained in the hard sciences. They did not come expecting to find a ghost. They came to find a rational, physical explanation. They brought their own measuring instruments, high-precision instruments. They installed them throughout the office. They wanted to capture every electrical deviation, every mechanical movement, every anomaly, and the devices recorded. The phenomena were real. They were measurable. The instruments registered events that contradicted the physicists. The movements were not periodic. They followed no recognizable pattern. The forces that moved the objects came from unknown sources. Carter and Fisher could not explain them with known physical laws. In their later report, they wrote, "The observed phenomena cannot be explained with the physical laws known to us." That was an extraordinary statement. Physicists do not say such things lightly. They had checked everything: electromagnetic interference, mechanical vibrations, air currents. Nothing could explain the movements. But there was someone else who learned of the case. Someone who offered a different kind of explanation. An explanation that went beyond physics. Dr. Henry Benson. Dr. Henry Benson was America's leading parapsychologist. He headed the Institute for Frontier Studies in Psychology in Berkeley. He had spent decades investigating inexplicable phenomena: telepathy, precognition, and poltergeists. Benson had a theory. He believed in psychokinesis, the ability of the mind to influence matter, not through conscious control, but through unconscious emotional energy. And poltergeist cases were, in his opinion, the most dramatic manifestations of this energy. In December of 1967, Benson traveled with his team to Riverside. He brought cameras, audio equipment, even more sensors. He wanted to document everything, and he focused on Jennifer Parker. Benson conducted psychological interviews with her. He found a young woman under enormous emotional stress: the broken engagement, the challenges as a single mother, the frustration with her work. She felt trapped, powerless, overwhelmed. The psychological examination revealed deeper layers. Jennifer showed signs of what physicians called hyperemia, facial flushing associated with emotional stress. Her blood pressure rose dramatically in stressful situations. Her body was in a state of constant tension. Benson also noticed physical reactions that correlated temporally with the phenomena. When Jennifer was under particular pressure, when she felt uncomfortable, when her emotions were most intense, then the paranormal incidents were also strongest. It was as if her body could not process the energy, as if it had to go somewhere. And so it manifested in the environment, in the lamps that swung, in the telephones that rang, in the pictures that rotated. Benson believed that this pent-up emotional energy manifested itself, that it transformed into physical force, that Jennifer, without knowing it, without wanting it, was causing these phenomena. He called it spontaneous psychokinesis, an unconscious projection of inner turmoil into the physical world. To test his theory, Benson observed the office for several weeks, and the pattern confirmed itself again and again. When Jennifer was present, things happened. When she was absent, everything remained calm. In early January of 1968, Jennifer took a vacation. For several days, she left Riverside, and during those days, nothing happened. No swinging lamps, no exploding light bulbs, no rotating pictures. Absolute silence. When she returned, the phenomena immediately began again. On the first day of her return, a lamp swung so violently that it was almost torn from the ceiling. A picture rotated 360 degrees. The telephones rang incessantly. For Benson, this was the proof. Jennifer was the center. She was the source of the energy. Without her, there were no phenomena. Benson's team managed to capture some of the events on video. Swinging lamps, rotating pictures. These recordings are still preserved today. They show objects moving without visible cause. They are one of the few visual documentations of an alleged poltergeist case. The witnesses to the phenomena were numerous and credible. There were the police officers who were called to the office and saw with their own eyes how a picture rotated on the wall while no one was nearby. They inspected the wall, searched for hidden mechanisms, found nothing. There were the journalists who came to report on the story and who themselves became witnesses to the events. A reporter stood in the room when a lamp suddenly began to swing. He filmed it. The footage clearly shows the lamp swinging back and forth without anyone touching it. There were the clients who came to the law office and were startled when things happened that should not happen. A woman later reported that she had seen how a calendar page detached itself and flew through the room, as if thrown by an invisible hand. There were the technicians, pragmatic people, who normally did not believe in the supernatural, but who had no explanation for what they saw. An electrician described how he replaced a light bulb, and barely had he turned around when the new bulb exploded with a loud bang. More than 40 people gave official statements about the phenomena. Their stories were consistent. Their credibility was hard to doubt. These were not sensation seekers or conspiracy theorists. They were normal citizens, professionals, officials. But the situation became untenable. The incidents were too frequent, too disruptive. The law firm could no longer work properly. The clients were frightened. The employees were at the end of their nerves. And Jennifer herself suffered. She developed physical symptoms, facial flushing, pressure in the ears. She felt uncomfortable, watched, accused. Although no one directly accused her, it was clear that all eyes were directed at her. On January 18th of 1968, Jennifer Parker left the office of attorney Michael Anderson. She resigned from her training position. And on that day, all phenomena stopped. From one moment to the next. The lamps stopped swinging. The telephones rang normally. The pictures remained in their place. The electrical system functioned perfectly. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, as if the invisible force that had haunted the office had left Riverside. Jennifer found a new position at another company. And there, it is reported, similar phenomena began. Lights flickered. Objects moved. But this time the incidents were less intense and did not last long. In the year 1969, Jennifer married, and after her wedding, paranormal phenomena were never again reported in her vicinity. It was as if her emotional stability, achieved through marriage, had calmed the source of the energy. But what really happened in Riverside? Was it real psychokinesis? Or was there another explanation? The skeptics spoke up. Critics claimed important details had been omitted. They pointed out that a police officer allegedly caught Jennifer in a fraudulent act, but this incident was never officially confirmed. Other critics suspected trickery. Some claimed nylon threads were used to move objects. A rubber hammer could have produced the knocking sounds. Michael Anderson disputed these claims. The case was never conclusively resolved. Physicist John Taylor suggested that some of the recordings might have been mechanically manipulated. He believed in a combination of expectation, hallucination, and deception. But there is a problem with the fraud theory. The multitude of witnesses. More than 40 people saw the phenomena. Police officers, electricians, technicians from the telephone company, physicists from Stanford, clients, random visitors. Were they all deceived? Were they all victims of an elaborate trick by a 19-year-old office clerk? The telephone calls to the time service were real. They were on the bills. 600 calls in 5 weeks. The telephone company could not explain how they came about. The electrical measurements were real. Bennett, Carter, and Fisher all documented anomalies that could not be explained with their instruments. The video recordings show objects moving. Are they fake? Experts have examined them and found no clear evidence of manipulation. What remains is a mystery that even more than 50 years later has not been solved. The Riverside case is one of the best documented poltergeist cases in the history of parapsychology. The files are preserved in the Riverside City Archive. The reports of the physicists, the utility company, the telephone company, all are still available. The case had far-reaching effects. It attracted international attention. Media from around the world reported on the Riverside haunting. Documentaries were made, books written. Newspapers across America reported on the Riverside ghost office. British scientists discussed the case in academic journals. In Japan, an entire television program was dedicated to the phenomenon. Riverside, a small California city, suddenly became known worldwide. The scientific community was divided. Some saw in the case a breakthrough, irrefutable proof of paranormal phenomena. Others saw a collective deception, mass hysteria triggered by clever manipulation. Conferences were held. Experts from various disciplines, physicists, psychologists, parapsychologists, skeptics, came together to debate the case. The arguments were heated. Emotions ran high. No one could agree. What remained undisputed was the quality of the documentation. Even the harshest skeptics had to admit that this was one of the most thoroughly investigated cases of paranormal activity. The number of witnesses, the variety of experts, the technical measurements, all contributed to a case that could not simply be dismissed. For Dr. Henry Benson, it was one of the most convincing cases of his career. He frequently cited it as evidence for the existence of psychokinesis. The correlation between Jennifer's presence and the phenomena was too strong to be ignored. For the skeptics, it was another example of how easily people can be deceived, how expectations and confirmation bias distort perception. Michael Anderson, the attorney, was left with considerable costs. The telephone bills amounted to $15,000. The repairs, the expert fees, the business loss, everything added up. He never spoke publicly about his personal beliefs. Whether he believed in a real poltergeist or not, he kept to himself. But he insisted that the phenomena were real, that he had seen them, that they could not be explained. Jennifer Parker herself gave interviews decades later. She denied any conscious involvement in the events. "I am a normal person," she said. "I have no special abilities." She described the time in Riverside as the most difficult of her life. The attention, the suspicions, the feeling of being held responsible for something she could not control. It was traumatic. Whether she told the truth or not, we will never know with certainty. But one thing is clear. Her life was forever changed by the events in Riverside. What can we learn from this case? First, it shows the limits of our knowledge. Even with the most modern technology, with physicists from Stanford, with months of investigation, the phenomena could not be definitively explained. Second, it shows the complexity of the human psyche. Whether the phenomena were caused by psychokinesis, by fraud, or by a combination of both, they were deeply connected to Jennifer's emotional state. The stress, the frustration, the helplessness she felt manifested in some way in her environment. Third, it shows how difficult it is to investigate the paranormal. Poltergeist cases are chaotic, unpredictable, difficult to control. They cannot be reproduced in a laboratory. They occur spontaneously and disappear just as suddenly. The Riverside case stands in a long tradition of poltergeist stories, from the Bell Witch Tale in Tennessee in the 19th century to the Entity case in Culver City in the 70s. These stories share common features. Almost always, there is a focus person, often a teenager or young adult under emotional stress. The phenomena occur spontaneously, without conscious control. They stop when the focus person leaves the environment or when their emotional state stabilizes. These patterns suggest that something real happens, even if we do not understand what it is. Whether it is psychokinesis, as Benson believed, or a form of group psychology, as skeptics suspect, or something entirely different, remains open. In a world increasingly dominated by science and technology, cases like Riverside remind us that there are still mysteries, phenomena that elude our explanation, experiences that challenge our rational worldviews. Perhaps what happened in Riverside is a hint that reality is more complex than we think, that there are forces we do not yet understand, that the boundary between mind and matter, between consciousness and physical world, is more permeable than modern science wants to admit. Or perhaps it was just a clever fraud carried out by a desperate young woman seeking attention, a trick so good that it fooled even experienced physicists. We may never know, but the fascination remains. The files in the Riverside City Archive still attract researchers. The video recordings are analyzed and reanalyzed. The debate continues. The office at Main Street 42 still exists today. It is again a completely normal law office. No swinging lamps, no exploding light bulbs, no mysterious telephone calls. But the people in Riverside remember. The older residents still tell stories about the haunting of 1967, about the time when their city stood at the center of an inexplicable phenomenon. For those interested in the paranormal, Riverside has become a pilgrimage site. They come to see the building, to walk down the street where history was made, to feel if anything remains of the energy that once filled the office. The story of the Riverside Poltergeist is more than just a ghost story. It is a story about the limits of knowledge, about the power of the unknown, about the fragility of our certainties. It reminds us that despite all our technology, all our science, all our rational explanations, there are still things we do not understand. Moments when order breaks down. Times when the impossible becomes possible. And it poses a question that everyone must answer for themselves. What is real? Where are the limits of the possible? And are we ready to accept phenomena that challenge our worldview? In the case of Riverside, dozens of people saw things that should not be. Physicists measured forces they could not explain. Cameras recorded movements that seemed to contradict natural laws. Were they all deceived? Or did they catch a glimpse of something that lies beyond our understanding? The answer depends on what you believe, what you are willing to accept, whether you think the world can be completely explained by physics and chemistry, or whether you believe there is more out there, more between heaven and earth, as Shakespeare said, than our philosophy dreams of. The haunting of Riverside remains one of the most fascinating mysteries of modern times, a case so well documented that it cannot simply be dismissed, and yet so puzzling that it allows no definitive explanation. Perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about such stories. They leave room for wonder, for doubt, for the imagination that the world is bigger and stranger than we think. They remind us to remain humble, that we do not have all the answers, that there is still terra incognita, unexplored territory, not on maps, but in the nature of reality itself. And they give us something that has become rare in our technologized, thoroughly rationalized world, a genuine mystery. Something that makes us wonder, that gives us goosebumps, that makes us ask the question, what if? What if Jennifer Parker really could unconsciously move objects? What if there are forces we have not yet discovered? What if the boundary between mind and matter is not as firm as we thought? These questions have no simple answers, but they are worth asking. The Riverside case is closed, but not solved. The phenomena have stopped, but the questions remain. And as long as there are such questions, as long as there are stories that force us to think, the mystery remains alive. In the quiet hours of the night, when you are alone, when the shadows grow longer, think of Riverside, of the young woman who came to an office and triggered a wave of the inexplicable, of the lamps that swung without being touched, of the telephones that rang with no one calling. And ask yourself, could that happen to me? Could I, under the right stress, under the right circumstances, influence the world around me in inexplicable ways? Science says no. But the stories, the old stories, the ones that whisper in the darkness, they say something different. They say the world is full of wonders and terrors, that there are forces we do not understand, that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes true. And the haunting of Riverside, this small outbreak of the inexplicable in a quiet California town, is evidence of that. A window into another reality, a crack in the facade of the normal world. The question is not whether it happened. Too many people saw it. Too much was documented. The question is, what does it mean? And that question, my friends, everyone must answer for themselves. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, but also stay open to the possibility that the world is stranger than we can imagine. Because in Riverside, in the fall of 1967, something happened. Something that should not be. Something that blurred the lines between the known and the unknown. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is still happening. Somewhere, in a quiet office, in a dark room, in a moment when order breaks down and the impossible becomes reality. Good night, and sleep well. if you can.